Welcome to the fifth lecture of the Heo Geo lecture series for 2026. This is brought to you by the Philippine Geographical Society in partnership with the UP Department of Geography. I'm TJ Ciprian and I will be your moderator for this session. Just a few reminders before we proceed. We are all reminded to keep our microphones on mute during the presentation. We encourage everyone to interact by typing in your questions and comments in the chat box. They will be addressed during the open forum after the talk. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded for documentation purposes. And before we end today's session, we would like to request everyone to turn on their cameras, if possible, for a group photo. To begin our program for today, let us all welcome Dr. Mylene de Guzman of the UP Department of Geography and the Vice President for Internal Affairs of the Philippine Geographical Society for her opening remarks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's Heo Geo lecture. I would like to see the word cloud, please. Okay, maybe we will share a link to the word cloud later. So to introduce our speaker for this lecture, Kevin S. Fox is a human geographer and the founder and director of the Geographical Imaginations Expedition and Institute. With over 20 years of experience in global citizenship education, his work explores how individuals and communities understand their place within an interconnected world. He has developed programs that integrate storytelling, simulation, and field-based learning to make global systems more accessible and participatory. A National Geographic Grosvenor Teacher Fellow and Inner Development Goals Ambassador, he works at the intersection of human geography, critical pedagogy, and imagination to advance new models of global learning. Originally from Connecticut in the US, he currently lives on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees. To talk about his work entitled Inner Geographies, Imagination, Experience, and Global Citizenship, everyone please welcome Kevin Fox.
So thank you to everybody, especially the UP Department of Geography and to the research clusters that are hosting me here today, HUG, the Human Geography, and then Melange, the Media Literacy, Geographies, and Geohumanities clusters. And a special thanks to Joseph Pallas, who, as many of you might know, we knew each other from graduate school back in North Carolina and have recently figured out that we probably haven't seen each other for over a decade. So it's good to see Joseph again and good to see you all here. And so let's dive right in. I think my introduction kind of says all of these things. And certainly from the standpoint of a CV, these are kind of the spaces I've been working in: global citizenship education, maybe more so with higher level high school students, meaning students in the IB diploma program or students who take AP level courses or A level courses. Teaching in international schools has been what I've been doing certainly since graduate school. But I'd also like to situate myself a little bit in another way and kind of tell you where I'm coming from. I'm in the Pyrenees. I'm not from here. I decided to come here on sabbatical, sort of last school year, if you will, and found myself exploring sort of the local geographies. And it's been quite a journey for me to do that. During the first year, I turned really looking at the local here and understanding the local in what is called Alto Aragon. It's a region caught sort of between the Basque-speaking and then the Catalan-speaking regions, kind of lost in that idea of having that linguistic diversity. People forget about Aragonese, which is the language here. So I spent the first year actually learning Aragonese with local speakers, hiking a lot, following the rivers up to their sources and into the mountains, and generally just kind of thinking about local history and how it fits into global networks. So tracing the Rio Ara, the Cinca and the Cinqueta, all up into the mountains. In my second year, I really actually switched. And that's what I'm in right now, is in kind of getting into this idea of outward and joining global networks. I did a global leadership diploma program through the University for Peace, which is a UN mandated university based out of Costa Rica. And as mentioned before, became an interdevelopment goals ambassador. And so one idea that's really shaped and made sense of this movement for me, thinking about the local, thinking about the global, and as an adult learner and as a lifelong learner, it's this process constantly that I've kind of engaged with on my own journey, if you will, my own pilgrimage, intellectual pilgrimage. And so it's learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so deepening my understanding of the concepts, the ways of thinking about the world. And that's kind of what I want to explore with you today. And you see here a pilgrimage that I've done, the Camino de Santiago, but just to kind of frame our thinking a little bit as a looking at a journey here today. So many of you may have seen this before, the True Size of website, which I love. I love using it with students, and it's all about maps and perception. And what I've done here, if you can tell, I wanted to do my due diligence and see how big the Philippines spread out, the archipelago. And I basically placed Manila, or even where you guys are, I think just outside the downtown, where I am exactly in the Pyrenees. Okay. And so I wanted to see how far it stretches out. Look at that, Paris all the way down into Algiers. And then, as mentioned before, I'm from here. And so where you are, your department, uh, is exactly the town I grew up in, outside of New York City in the state of Connecticut. And looking at the stretch all the way up into northern Quebec down to Bermuda, the Philippines. I'm going to throw a couple of just different things here for us to consider. Many of you may have seen this before, a great TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. Well, growing up in the 1980s in the United States, this was the single story I had of the Philippines and this whole idea of shoes. So the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but they're incomplete. And the problem with the stories we tell ourselves about the places we live are oftentimes incomplete. And so oftentimes they make one story become the only story. And I knew well enough that the Imelda Marcos photograph and her shoes, that's not the story of the Philippines, obviously. But that is the one that dominated the media in the 1980s. Now, I've shared with you a document in the chat with a bunch of links. So if you haven't seen this TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, you have that link there. And this is actually really one fundamental to what we do at the Geographical Imaginations Expedition and Institute. Now, where do we get this long, convoluted name, this long name, the Geographical Imaginations Expedition and Institute? Well, it actually comes from something. It's an homage to the Detroit Geographical Expedition and Institute. He did not use the term imagination. But in the 1960s, late 1960s, Bill Bungie, as his name is said, devised and brought together a group of people to analyze and look at and use the tools of geographers in the city of Detroit to challenge this. This quote here, I think, really captures it. Geography is the study of the Earth's surface as the home of man or humanity, if we will, but the view from which person's home, which men's home. And so and again, there's a link to for you to learn more about the DGIE or EI, sorry, and the idea here was to bridge academic geography with what he called folk geography, and so that's kind of what I like to think we do as well, is bridging that everyday geographers, people thinking about place and space and scale, with people in the academy. All right, and so the piece here that's really important, though, and we'll get into this a little bit later too, is they wanted to create what they called oughtness maps of things, of how things are, and maps of how things ought to be. So really two important things there: how they are from different perspectives, and then perhaps imagining different ways they might ought to be. The Geographical Imaginations Expedition and Institute started when I was a graduate student, and Joseph may have seen these before. My first major mapping project was an atlas for doctor shortages. We made over 500 maps for the US states and looked at where doctors were to be able to then lobby and advocate for filling where doctors aren't. That project also just led into a whole range of cartographic projects for mainly for academic publications. And to be a little poetic, if you know The Shawshank Redemption, the film, you'll know what this map might suggest. The second phase of the GIEI, as I like to call it, was doing what we called radio expeditions. And so audio storytelling. I was teaching at an international school in Salzburg, Austria, and the local radio station it was a community radio station where you can propose a show and get an hour to do it. And so once a month, I had a 60-minute long episode that explored a whole range of geographic themes and brought together artists, academics, everyday geographers in dialogue, a lot of kind of dialogues that we recorded and then aired on one Saturday every month. And so I had Yifu Tuan for those who are studying humanistic geographies, actually for a double episode with Yifu, with Professor Tuan. We called it Geographies of Everything and Geographies of Nothing. I had Andy Merrifield for those who are interested in Lefebvrean studies. He's done some critical biography work of Henri Lefebvre, and we talked about that. I also had Joseph Pallas on as expert cultural geographer to talk about who people who come to do the Sound of Music tour. Remember, the Salzburg is the home to not just Mozart, but the Sound of Music. People who come there to really kind of embody the steps of Maria von Trapp. And so we talked about that, and you can listen to that to hear your professor or colleagues' comments. It also gave me a platform a little bit to explore my own interests in pilgrimage. Here we talk a little bit about St. Brendan the Navigator, a little bit of the Sitting Near Borges, a personal essay that I had written that we kind of brought it to radio. And then a famous book, The Art of Pilgrimage, got the author Phil Cousineau to talk with us about what that means, what going on pilgrimage really means. We weren't just in Salzburg. We made it to Cuba for a number of episodes, East Africa, and then through my National Geographic work in the Arctic. This was our guiding quote. I love quotes, and I found this to be really our guiding and shaping when I was choosing episodes and people to speak with. This was always the one that got me. It was, what are the things that influence the way I see the world? It's very kind of a independent and personal at times, but also with the idea that maybe we find some collective kind of understanding as well. So drawing out the world, and as those years go by, we have these images in our minds of the world we are creating, right? And so that world that we create, and the day before we die, we realize that those lines and those objects and things, well, that's really us in the end. And so, at least this is my interpretation of Jorge Luis Borges' quote. Oops. And now we're into the third phase. And this is something that's come out of this sabbatical, basically, in sort of an incubation period, if you will. I've created this now as a nonprofit and looking to advocate for and co-create spaces for global citizenship learning. And there's these, and I'll go through these just quickly, but these are the sort of major areas that we want to work with. And I'll just go through quickly each one. The research side. So for instance, I have a project right now, it's really looking at how in advanced placement, which is that sort of upper level high school curriculum in the United States, which is also global, but mostly based in the US at least, is looking at what kind of geographical imaginations are presented and are in those courses like AP Human Geography, AP World History, and so that's something we're looking at. Another thing is advocacy, is actually through this AP program uh, to promote and raise awareness for global citizenship education by uh, by basically proposing that there should be an AP Global Citizenship course. Storytelling, we're going to be starting up a creative nonfiction journal to highlight personal stories, personal essays, and different ways to travel and engage with place. Always looking at lexicon building, building this shared language around belonging and planetary well-being through things, simple kind of creations like glossaries. And then really interested in question making and question formulation. So done a lot of work with the question formulation technique in and around Boston in the US. They're based there, and have devised programs in projects called Asking the World, where students come up with where would you go in the world and what would you ask. And then lastly, this is what we're going to spend most of today on, is the simulation, is developing group experiences and ideally these citizen assembly simulations that through the world of as a village of 100 people. So the vision here is all about global citizenship education, democratizing that, very much kind of in line with Bill Bungay, but maybe doing it in a slightly different way. Here, really interested in these three. So I'm kind of thinking about my last 2 years, a local year, a global year, and both kind of feeding into this inner kind of growth and thinking about that arc of learn, unlearn, relearn. So what is the space? The space of our isn't Detroit, like in Bill Bungay's great example in the canon of human geography and critical human geography. But it's in the mindset, it's in the values, the worldviews, our individual collective beliefs, and that's kind of how we're defining the geographical or a geographical imagination. And this is we love threes here. And so another arc that is guiding our work with this village of 100 people is this idea of orientation, imagination, transformation. And we'll hear a little bit more about that as we go on. Now, shift gears a little bit. I want to bring in this, which I love that in your description of the different lectures for this series, you mentioned which SDGs they're aligned with. And I just quickly kind of talk about the SDGs came after the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, assuming that this is a progression, a deepening of those, and we go into then expanding them with the Sustainable Development Goals post MDGs. And that's, as you can see there, the date is coming. The ideas for the SDGs was always framed around an ending date of 2030. And I feel like we're in the space now of wanting to see what's next. And people who do that for a living and work with this are wondering, oh, where are we going to go next? I've always thought as a human geography teacher, and as someone thinking about things in this sort of journey pilgrimage framework, I've always felt like maybe there was something missing here, and so have gone and sought out other ways to kind of further develop my understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's been through the Inner Development Goals. And so there's a whole global community of practice, really science-based, driven by kind of, I think a similar question like mine is, well, what kinds of mindsets do we need to actually accomplish the sustainable development goals? And should we be working on both? And so this is where I'm kind of at right now, really just having completed the inner development course 2 weeks ago. And so this is kind of fresh to me and really exciting to kind of see a global community practice in and around what we call inner development. All right. So the major phrase here is outer change needs inner development, and we can't forget that. And so, over the past 10 years, engaged with the SDGs with my students, ultimately it comes back to these questions and some of the reflections that we'd have is, well, what does global awareness mean? What does empathy mean? How do I know the person around the world that might be in a different situation, and this SDG maybe is talking more about them than maybe talking more about or less about me, and so this awareness and the empathy needed to even consider how we can change the world through the SDGs. And so I'll just quickly, and this is one of the links in my list of links that you can follow and read more about. But here's a whole, I talked before about lexicon and keywords. And so here's a really great slide just to get a sense of what the inner development, this is the inner development guide now, what that is going to look like if one was to work with it. And thinking about how this then perhaps could be fused and brought into conversation with the SDGs in such a way that as the logos combined here might suggest for our next step, the 2030, maybe to 2050. So the simulation that I mentioned earlier, and this is what we'll kind of finish with on today a little bit, is really our flagship project, and kind of thinking about turning this into a nonprofit. We wanted to focus in on one major project, and we decided that the Village of 100 People is a great first major project to kind of engage with, and brought into this idea of it being a civic assembly model, and not just talking about statistics, but then engaging in debate, engaging in dialogue about different positions, material positions according to the statistics that we work with, of different people around the world. And so it started way back 10 years ago. I did this while I was in Salzburg for the first time. And in fact, one of the radio show slash podcast episodes was about it. This was back when the world population was 7,500,000,000. It's much more now, closer to 8,300,000,000. But we basically created 100 different profiles according to the global statistics at the time, and then worked with, I'm just kind of showing the documents that you can access from that web page, also linked, and the spread back in 2018 or so a little less than 10 years ago. This would have been, if the world was a village of 100 people, 1.4 of those people would be Filipino, or live in the Philippines, which there's a diaspora, which would be trickier to then count. But certainly living in the Philippines, 1.4. So we did this by regions to allow for those generalizations to kind of be easier to round up or round down. But here, this would be the population spread back 8-9 years ago. And we did a simulation, and it was basic. It was really just about those statistics. And so each person had a piece of paper in their hand, you can see there, based off of the form that I showed you earlier. And we basically performed or simulated the world according to the statistic, 50-50 male, female, This has changed. I think the world's even more urban now, 8 years later. Um, this is income, so extreme poverty as it was defined then was $1.90 US a day. So these are people living in extreme poverty. According to the the UN SDGs, this has probably changed. Here's poverty line, 32. This is under $3.10 a day. And then that one person, the Imelda Marcos, if you will, controlling 50% of wealth. And that would be, that one person's really, in today's terms, that one person's 84 million people, right? Because that one person represents 1% of the population. Um, in our world, if our world was a village of 100 people, 17 wouldn't know how to read and write. That's changed. This one is a one, especially when we're talking with university groups, or in my high schools, most people were considering, or more than considering, going to university. It was sort of a trajectory that was expected. That 7 would have completed a university degree. I think that's grown a little bit in 10 years. And then 54, internet access will have changed, safe drinking water, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see those different statistics. And so now in this past 2 years, basically we've revamped, and I'm not showing those yet. I'll explain that in a minute, but these are the older photographs, but we've come up with 100 new profiles based on recent statistics, bringing in post SDG awareness building and how maybe the IDGs might fit into that, a civic assembly simulation. Think of model UN, if anyone's familiar with that, but you don't represent a country. You represent, you're part of the global village. So it's a bit of a shift in how we are thinking about that collectivity. It's not a group of countries, but a group of people who represent the same place. And so that's something we're thinking about. Definitely smaller group options, online, in person, all kind of incubated through that global leadership diploma program. What do I mean by that? The projects that I did for each of those courses were developing pieces of this. And then just this last month, I worked with a group of undergraduates from different universities around the world, Ashoka in India, Stellenbosch, South Africa, University of Warwick in the UK, and then Cornell in the US. And basically with a team of 8, they redid the statistics. And it's interesting because the idea was to have a final product, but we recognize that the process itself of putting together, what does the global village of 100 people look like? And the process of putting that together, as opposed to the final product of the statistics, was where perhaps there's something to be developed as a program. And so we're kind of thinking about that. I've been working People Powered as a participatory democracy hub, working with a mentor there for thinking about how to really turn this into a civic learning simulation and not just the presentation of statistics. And any of you familiar with the United World College and that movement, I'll be doing a short course in June that really is going to take a small group and go through this and do the orientation, looking at the global realities, imagining how those realities could change using the SDGs to do that, and then having a citizen assembly to come together and decide on what we might work on as a group of 10 or 15 or 20 people. And then also in August, I'll get another chance to do it's not easy to get a group of 100 people together, but at the AFS Youth Assembly in Geneva, I'll be doing a simulation with 100 global people coming from around, young people, 18 to 35, coming from around the world. So yeah, the plan here is this long-term, establish the world as a village of 100 people as a simulation and a way to practice dialogue about these really, really important ways of thinking about systems and ultimately where people fit into those systems. And this is also linked. I'll just quickly say this idea is out there, this idea of getting out of your bubble, right? And so this is, I think, a great way to name what it is we're doing. And so this was developed in Stockholm at the university in the economics department for people to get out of their socioeconomic bubble and have conversations with people who are not in that same bubble. Well, I'm wanting to scale this to global and have people kind of think about those different realities around the world. Now, and this is my ending here. Who are the 100? I've put this here as a bit of a joke. There was a series that was called The 100 back in the early 2000s. These were Earth was dismantled and they went out to space and they sent back 100. I think in the IMDb description it says juvenile delinquents. And to repopulate Earth. That's not the 100 I'm thinking about, nor am I thinking about the 100. This is something that some people ask in sort of parlor games, like who would be the 100 people that would represent Earth to the extraterrestrials? So kind of like in the film Arrival, if you've seen that. That's not what I mean. And I don't mean we should all get Oprah to share some popular culture from the US. And hopefully that's not the single story you think of the US is through Oprah. Oprah is not the one we're thinking about when we say come up with your 100. Okay, so it's really about a wide range of people that might better represent our global community. I share this, and I understand we're not talking about religion here, and it's not why I share it. I share it as a sort of as a human geographer. I saw this all the time growing up. It was on the wall in my brother's room, and it actually just makes me thinking about the global village as 100 people. Is that how connected we really are, right? But even on this example, as you can tell, you can see there, and that might not be the only famous face in here, but that even in this example, they're trying to bring in famous people. And I'd like us to not think that and think about just the everyday people who make up the 100. And so that's the question I just end up with, and look forward to kind of your questions is how would you kind of go about putting together a group of 100? Would you use the statistics? And if you wouldn't, why not? Should you have somebody that's from an island, an archipelago, like you guys are living on, because you'll have there's a whole range of characteristics and that could be going into trying to create a global village of 100 people that represents not just material realities, but then these ways of knowing, ways of thinking about the world, that they're all represented in this 100. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that very deeply and engaging and, of course, thought-provoking talk that you gave us today. So it really invited us to ask who are our 100 who are going to be included in this number to represent the global village, as we say it. Okay, so at this point, we are now proceeding with the open forum. So we now welcome your questions, reflections, or comments on the talk of Kevin. Maybe I would like to show the word cloud that um, containing all the words that were associated with the word geographical imagination. So we had this pre-registration link that was sent to our participants, and then they were asked what do they mean or what word do they associate with the geographical imagination. So majority of our participants said the word spatial rather. So the word spatial really dominates the word cloud, Kevin. So perhaps the first question will come from me, Kevin, because drawing from our word cloud, um, how do you think your work invites us to rethink the word spatial? Not only perhaps as an external space, but rather it is being shaped by our imagination, our perception, and even our inner world, just like what you have discussed earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking for I had to sign in today too, and I put in mindset was my term, and but yeah, I think understanding the key concept, space, place. I always like to say scale too, uh, but it's fundamental, I think, to in what I'm calling for here is us to kind of think about where we map ourselves in that local, in that global, and in saying the word inner is really just claiming that space too. Is that I see the world because I see it, or the way I see the world is through my eyes, and my eyes have been influenced. And I brought in like the shoes example as a joke, but really, I mean, during the '80s that was one of the things I knew about the Philippines, right? And 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 in the media is today that's just the barrage of media that influences the way we kind of think about the world and think about spaces, and that time space compression,
Mhm.
that uh, you know, even thinking about the overlaying of the Philippines map of the places that I'm in, that to me that's all about time space compression too. I'm not just doing that because it's fun to do on the game, but it's I'm for this moment stepping into Manila for a second, right? And you're stepping into maybe the space that I'm in the Pyrenees. But yeah, I think understanding the the co-production of space, to go back to like a Henri Lefebvre theory, and how we are part of that. Uh, and I think that's the part that I'm just stressing so much lately is really important, and being able to dance across scale. I think, from the global to the local, seeing the local in the global, seeing the global in the local, and then finding yourself in that too. Those are all key things in this trajectory that I've been on, and uh, I wonder, is this a process of our own orientation, of our own then imagination, that is maybe not just individual but collective as well.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the very comprehensive response. Perhaps because I'm also very interested in the work that you have presented to us earlier, seeing that I'm also working in the education sector along with my colleagues. And I also always encounter um, global citizenship education, which has become a buzzword, even here in our higher education institutions in the Philippines. And you have presented your work on geographical imagination. So my second question, Kevin, is that um, in terms of geographical imagination, how does it help learners to, let's say, see things or see global issues that we are seeing right now, not as, distant to them? Because if you're living in another country and then this issue is happening in another country, there's a tendency for students to, we'll just ignore it, or because it's not really closer to home. So, how can geographical imagination help our students, our learners to see these issues not as distant or abstract to them, but as something that is lived, something that is spatial, something that is connected to their own lives or to their own responsibilities as global citizens, since we see ourselves as part of this global village.
Yeah. Um, I feel like, again, in this kind of thinking of the time space compression and thinking about maybe a geographical imagination that includes what we is also another popular buzz term these days, which is systems thinking. But in teaching like human geography, we talk about systems, we talk about processes, patterns, and I think we have a couple of good examples. COVID is a really great example, a case study for seeing how something could spread and talking about the diffusion of some kind of either it's cultural diffusion, or we're talking about, in this case, in public health, how quickly something could change scales. So I think what we have today as teachers are really good examples. And if you want to go to the current events, the jet fuel situation, um, maybe not
Yeah.
everyone's clued into that yet, but within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, when people start wanting to travel for summer, especially people who work in academia or in educational institutions, breaking for the summer, it's going to have a huge impact, I think, or potentially have a huge impact on people. And so bringing these examples in, I think, is really an important way. Case studies are real important ways for students to get on the ground certain kinds of concepts. Yeah, did I get the? Was there another part to the question that I'm forgetting now?
You were able to completely address the question, Kevin. Yes.
Okay, okay,
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much
thanks.
for highlighting the that particular case, especially what we have experienced during COVID. And of course, right now, the war in Iran, that also drives fuel prices. Later on, it's going to have a domino effect, especially in the prices of basic commodities, because these commodities are in transporting these commodities, we use oil to bring them to supermarkets, our markets, and wherever we sell these products. So I'm also following in your discussion earlier. I'm also following the fact that your work is really co-creation. You always emphasize co-creation. It means that it's more of community based. We always emphasize democratic knowledge production in that case. So in your experience in your work, Kevin, um, how do you intend to continue your work as something that it helps expand democratic knowledge production, and to make maybe the geography more participatory, more accessible, especially to the marginalized? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I was getting to that in the talk here, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, just because it's so recent. Me working with the group of undergraduates in that teamwork program, where I realized, wait a second, the real project here is not okay. It's important to update our statistics, of course, and that's what we did. But I wondered if the real kind of democratic project and the sort of democratic knowledge production that uh, maybe I'm really looking for is by bringing together groups of people to then decide how we think of how can we collectively uh, draw out, if you will, or build. Sometimes I think of it as like a conceptual Legos, if you will, of
Mhm.
okay, we're going to actually build this village of 100 people. Well, who's there? It's not just it's the orientation, which is the snapshot of the current, and that's important for us to wonder. Well, we understand the current in very different ways, right? And
Yeah.
so can we come together and decide and come up with characteristics that come up with this village of 100 people? um, and then it's I think the imagination is, well, why is this person marginalized? Why this? Why that?
Yes.
And then it's proposing a different way that that hundred comes together,
Mm-mm.
and in doing so, uh, I mean, I think this is a real sort of pilgrimage in a way for the people that are involved. It's a real uh, intellectual expedition, if we want to use a different term here. I mean, the name of our organization is Expedition, so this is an expedition to go deeper and really kind of name how is it that I see the world, and how can I, with working with 8 or 10 or even 100 people, kind of name that together. And I think that's where the power perhaps in this whole simulation process might actually lie, is how do we come together and put that hundred as a, and create that hundred village. Because once you've been given the statistics, that's one way of knowing, right? um, I think for some people who don't have a grasp of, like, those slides that I showed, those photographs, that could be, that's an important step, is understanding the world statistically. But that's that's privileging just one way of knowing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think what I'm learning in part of this is, wait a second, the good stuff is in the actual putting together what those 100 people look like, and you decide. And so that is the if there's we're looking for if we're looking for a product, the product is, well, what are the things that you think represent our current status as humanity, right? And then for people to discuss that, debate that, and ultimately make decisions about how that looks. Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. There's a question that is directed to me by one of our colleagues. He has this geography class projects for the last 3 years on localizing SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which
Yeah.
fuses geography with sustainability, and they are also letting the locals of a town in the province of Zambales, which is north of Manila, by the way. They let the locals define and create the meaning of what sustainable development looks like from their perspective. So, do you have any experience with respect to localizing SDGs in your work and the inner development goals that you have just discussed to us earlier?
Yeah. A couple examples. Um, One thing I did, Salzburg was this, I was there for 3 years and started the radio
Mm.
program. I had all sorts of great things. Like, if there's ever a place, like if you ever think there's a place where you do well, like that was my place. And I should probably go back there. But with my students, we called it the Salzburg expedition, and students had to go into town and sort of, they were given tasks. They had to engage with the town, um, in and around one of the themes from the course, basically. Just to give you an example, they went and interviewed a dairy farmer. Salzburg's known for Austria in general is known for its dairy, but Salzburg specifically. And so engaging, looking at like the dairy shed, the process of milk from farm to table, things like that. And so what was missing there, though, a little bit was, okay, well, how is this connected to SDGs? I mean, we did that a little bit, but it wasn't like, all right, we're going to go out and do SDGs. We kind of designed these expeditions, um, in political geography, cultural geography, development, international development, et cetera, for students to get that hands-on experience. And so that, I would say, is part of it. Last year, over the summer, I took a group of high school students from the US to Spain, here down in Granada in the south, where the focus of the program was see how people in Spain are engaging with SDGs, and then take it back to your hometown and design a project. And so they already had like ideas, and then the idea, you know, some semi-focused ideas when they flew over to Spain, and then when they saw people doing similar things here, and then brought that back to the U.S. Do you have to travel to do that? No. I mean, there's other ways to engage groups of students online, et cetera. But I think seeing people in there, you're accomplishing a couple of things. Like you're seeing people in another part of the world engage with this. And I think a lot of our US American students were thinking, well, wait a second, we're behind on this. Why aren't we engaged with the SDGs as much as this community is? And so it's a little bit of modeling. And then I think through exchange, you're then also building empathy, building awareness, raising consciousness of how collective it all is, the SDGs. So that's something I think that works at the sort of high school, maybe early university level, which is which is where I'm at.
Thanks, Kevin. There's a question. Dr. Mads is raising her hand. Dr. Mads, go ahead.
Hello, Kevin. It was such an enjoyable lecture. So thank you for sharing that. This is not really a question, more of a curiosity. Like I wonder, with your extensive experience in, in pedagogy and in global citizenship education, I wonder how the tools change, considering, we are now in this TikTok generation where students, this is kind of related to DJ's question about kind of how do we speak more effectively to our learners. So I'm just wondering if you notice like shifts in how we deal with this generation, especially they're so used to short form content, over reading. This is also an issue that I have with my current students. They prefer watching YouTube videos, which is well and good, but I hope that they, read, they read more. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question, and I've seen different generations to age myself a little bit here. And really this March experience with the undergraduates that I worked with, the teamwork program, it really turned out to be almost like a focus group. The goal of the project was for them to kind of put together the statistics and redo that. But it turned out to just be a real big learning experience for me. Here's a good example of what you're kind of bringing up. Here I have like a 53-minute podcast, previous radio show. It was 53 minutes because then they filled the rest of the hour with the BBC News. So my episodes were always like 53 minutes. And can you imagine your students now, and the students that are there today kind of are here today with us, listening to 53 minutes that's a long stretch. And so that was some of the feedback I got from them was, no, turn this into digestible. You just mentioned like short YouTube videos, the 3 to 5 minute, I think, sweet spot, which is good, and have a series of those. And so that's what we're going to develop, is a series of, now with these new statistics that we've come up with, that we've compiled and really haven't come up with, to create content that, yes, is aware of content consumption patterns and what people are going to look at. 10 years ago, maybe the podcast it fit. I mean, I don't know. It was definitely for a broad audience for sure, not just for students. But yeah, I mean, I think I just to give you a sense, I have my first smartphone, just as recent as 2-3 years ago. So I'm a little bit of an ancient as it goes. That doesn't mean I'm not engaged. You could click on some of those links. I do basic web design through WordPress, those kinds of ways to kind of engage. But yeah, I think back to your question though, like in the classroom, definitely like using short videos, students creating short videos, creating basically what I like to do is, and I didn't share some of the student work just because I didn't want to put it all out there, but students have done like visual storytelling. And so when we've worked with the 100 profiles, they've kind of sat into one of those profiles and told the story of that person, and actually has gone as far as like naming them and created really visual presentations about that. So there's ways to make this project, uh, you know, visually, or to visualize this project in different ways. Yeah, so with students, obviously, and especially working online, you're always engaged with the tools, and gamifying some of what we're doing, especially with like high school students, with lexicon building using vocabulary games and such, is another way that I've kind of incorporated different technologies and different platforms and such. But yeah, I think just to kind of wrap it up, ultimately, I want students to be that storyteller, and whether they're going to do it through audio, video, through a poster, um, those Salzburg expeditions that the students went on, they had a blog, they were doing a blog that each expedition they had to, you know, share content, and this was like 2018. So imagine now you can do a lot more, and students are even more so engaged with those different tools. And so, yeah, ultimately telling the telling the story or your story within that, those geographies, that local, that global. Um, I think through using those tools is really, really important. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Kevin. On that note, that ends our open forum for our session for today. So we'd like to thank Kevin once again for your time and expertise, for coming to our Heo Geo lecture series, and also to our participants for engaging in this discussion. Now let us proceed with the awarding of the Certificate of Appreciation to Kevin. The Certificate of Appreciation is given to Kevin Fox for the valuable insights and expertise shared as a virtual resource speaker for the talk Inner Geographies, Imagination, Experience, and Global Citizenship as part of the Heo Geo lecture series held on April 24, 2026. It is signed by Dr. Christian Carlos Sagin, the chair of the UP Department of Geography, and of course, Professor Emmanuel B. Garcia, the president of Philippine Geographical Society. I'd like to invite our participants to give a virtual round of applause for Kevin. All right. So for his closing remarks, I'd like to call on Dr. Joseph Palis, professor of the UP Department of Geography.
Thank you, TJ. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Kevin, for such a wonderful provocation and something that we can all think about, especially in our case, since we are in the academe, so we could definitely enrich our activities to our students, especially in the world with 100 people. Sorry, not 1,000. I'm just going to say a few words about something that you said earlier, and then maybe respond to it. Not really to summarize because you did a good job doing it, but I feel like I need to probably give a little bit more context to your institute, which is the Geographical Imaginations Expedition Institute. As what Kevin said earlier when he presented this much earlier. In the session in our session, he said that it was inspired from the Detroit Geographical Expedition, which was led by Bill Bungie. Bill Bungie was a well-known cartographer, and the one thing that made him really not just um, significant to the study of cartography was because when he put up the DGE, the Detroit Geographical Expedition, he used the term expedition also as a kind of joke towards the use of the word expedition, which is the word of the colonizer or occupier. But basically, what he wanted to say was that he's going to travel around the world to look for inequalities. But the real thing is that in Detroit alone, there's so much of that already. So it's like finding those things in your backyard. And so if you look at online also for the Detroit Geographical Expedition, despite the fact that they formally closed in the late 70s, they have maps of rats, maps of inequality, really. And Kevin, just to give that context, 2 years ago in the AAG in Detroit, I managed to speak to one of the members of the Detroit Geographical expedition. She's the community organizer then. She was 18 when it started. She's a Gwendolyn Warren, who's now, yeah, yes, she was amazing. And she spoke about the fact that she was hungry and she wanted to work there. But anyway, I just wanted to make that connection with what Kevin did because it's such an important lineage, so to speak, right? Um, and also, I thought the word cloud that was presented, which I'm gonna send you in the email, is also interesting because the we asked the question or the word, what comes to mind when what word comes to mind when geographical imagination is given to you, and you got, spatial is the most populous one, but also interesting that it might as well be a world map, right, with a majority, I would probably say 56%, spatial, so people are thinking of spatial as something to ascribe for it. The rest are smatterings of mind-blowing, interesting, and so on. And that were some of the thoughts that people do, and perhaps we can, that's a way of expanding the project we're working on with the world of 100 people about what comes to mind when certain words are given to them, which which is probably something that was already done in our classes when we teach world regional geography or geography 103 every first semester, where we do, the usual kind of, you do a description of the world's regions in a given period of time. And I remember a class from one of our professors, Dr. Wendy Wolford, where she asked the students to somehow create an avatar of someone from the region, right? And they should embody the characteristics that's in the region. So, for example, you chose someone from Somalia, then all kinds of things, happening. Very interesting how students come up with something too. And I thought your project was such a wonderful way to make people see and read and do research and find geography even more exciting, and it's a web trap of looking at the world, especially now that there's also climate change, there's the war, and also the fuel crisis, um, that that's really going to impact the way some people look at the world. Did it really shrink much further? Is communication still as fluid as when we thought about it, or was it now more difficult, right? When Fujihara said something about the end of history, but also in a way expanding it to the end of globalization, could this be a part of it? And what would people think about that in the context of seeing the world? If there are 100 people in it, what would it look like now, based on realities around the world? So I thank you very much, Kevin, for giving us those kinds of provocations, those kinds of pedagogical aids, for us to make geography even more exciting. So thank you.